The childcare waitlists under this program have skyrocketed. Childcare centres cannot grow to meet the demand. Childcare centres cannot afford to operate. There is a bias against entrepreneur-run childcare centres and an open call to phase them out, which will decrease access even more.
The number of spaces the AG flagged that have been created are sitting at not even half of what was promised 3 years in.
It is impossible for parliamentarians to find out the number of children that have access to the spot and then measure it against the needs in a region.
Why does it take 3 years for you to make part of negotiations with provinces, though, that they collect better data?
Setting the provinces up to take the blame when they were coerced into signing a flawed federal contract.
We rely on the provinces and territories to find the spots, create the spots, and then staff those spots. We will push provinces and territories.
Will the entire country be at $10 a day daycare, average of, by April or not?
Well, it's hard to predict, as you know.
I mean, you promised it, though. The government promised it.
Well, we promised it together with provinces and territories.
Patty Hajdu sat down with Vassy Kapelos to explain why the $10 a day childcare promise is suddenly hard to predict as the 2026 deadline approaches. Were there really no signs this was coming? No earlier warnings at all? Well, let's take a look.
The childcare waitlists under this program have skyrocketed. Childcare centres cannot grow to meet the demand. Childcare centres cannot afford to operate. There is a bias against entrepreneur-run childcare centres and an open call to phase them out, which will decrease access even more. The people who need affordable childcare the most are not getting it. This program is not equitable. The child is not the priority of this agreement. Ideology is. Parents do not have choice. Children with special needs, which is going up and up as we see more and more neurodivergence, are not getting the support they need with this agreement. Access to childcare has decreased, meaning instead of empowering more women, it has taken away their choice. And yes, I have the stats to back all of this up, Madam Speaker. Setting the provinces up to take the blame when they were coerced into signing a flawed federal contract. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to start to read to you the headlines. These are just in the last month. In 1 month, as the Liberals' universal daycare policy unravels, Conservatives could go on the offensive. Burlington Childcare Centre leaves parents struggling with 1 week closing time. Daycares navigate financial struggles as province aims for $10 a day childcare. Rolling closures highlight need for emergency actions to keep $10 a day childcare viable. 9,200 children waiting for care in Waterloo Region. Alberta daycares brace for losses as Trudeau deal kicks in. Parents have yet to get the childcare they deserve. What does this have to do with daycare to the member opposite? Everything. People can't go to work. That's what's happening.
Ladies and gentlemen, former MP Michelle Ferreri, as she completely dismantled the $10 a day childcare commitment of the Liberals. This is what people are dealing with, and the issue is that we've covered this before. Is that it prioritizes the publicly funded daycares and the not-for-profits, the folks that have opened daycares to actually try and run a business, so the private ones. There's only a certain percentage that's allowed to be funded by this. So what ends up actually happening is the people say, well, I want the $10 a day childcare, and they end up on a wait list for those, and there's no support or funding or even people that are trying to get in to the private ones. So they end up losing money, and the ones that are funded by this, they end up losing money. Everybody starts losing money. Childcare centers start closing because nobody can actually afford to keep them open. So, like, this is doomed to fail. And then, as Michelle says, well, people are now, these women empowerment, which is the whole point of this, get women, more women into the workforce take away their choice to live, they got to stay home anyway to take care of their kids because there is no spots. Now, this is in February of 2024, folks. Now we take you to yesterday. Patty Hajdu and Vashi Kapelos.
To start off on this childcare announcement, in particular, what I read from the press release was that it stipulates additional money to help maintain the average cost per day of $19 in Ontario. The overall program initially promised a reduction to an average of $10 a day by April of 2026. Is this a concession that won't happen?
It's a reflection that it's taking Ontario longer to get to $10 a day at the space creation target. So the agreement actually commits to additional spots and commits to stabilizing at it's an average of $19 across Ontario, still saving the average family about $10,400 a year. So it's a big savings. And the parents I spoke to today were telling me all the different ways that they can use that money in their lives, in their families, how they're pursuing their education or careers. But it's also an acknowledgement that space creation has been challenging, both from a physical space perspective, as Minister Calandra talked about today, but also from a staffing perspective. And this gives everybody a little bit of breathing room to talk about the next steps.
So, doesn't talk about the emission. All she basically says is, well, we're trying, and I've talked to parents, and we're still going to be able to save them around $10,000 a day. And just listen to this talking point, folks. So what she says is, well, I've talked to parents, and they've told me all of the things that they could do with $10,000 in, over the course of the year. I'm sure if you talk to people without kids and you tell them, what if you had an additional $10,000, they could tell you what they would do with it over the course of that year. And most of them are going to tell you pretty sad things. Pay my bills, pay my rent, and buy food that I couldn't otherwise buy. That's what most people are probably going to tell you. So the fact that you're using a hypothetical of what could you do with $10,000, that actually doesn't put that into the people's pockets. But, you also heard Hajdu throw some blame Ontario's way. Well, Ontario still hasn't gotten this done. What did Michelle say in that video? She said that they would blame the provinces that were forced into this. Right? Because this wasn't the province's idea. This was the Liberal idea. Well, Liberal and NDP. Let's be honest. So to try and say, well, this is the province's fault, when it's your program, no, that doesn't wash.
I have some questions actually about space creation overall nationwide, because that was another tenet of the program and the promises made. But specifically on the price, Ontario is struggling, but it's not the only province. I believe the AG said as of March of 2024, 5 provinces and 3 territories had met the target, which meant that the others have not. Will the entire country be at $10 a day daycare average of by April or not?
Well, it's hard to predict, as you know.
I mean, you promised it, though. The government promised it.
Well, we promised it together with provinces and territories. And, we have inputs. We provide the funding. As you know, a large portion of that funding, provinces and territories also put money into their systems. But they control how fast those spaces can get created and how many people they can hire and how quickly. In some cases, it's a challenge about physical space. In some cases, it's having spots available without ECEs, early childhood educators, ready and able to be able to work. So each province and territory that's struggling to reach $10 a day is facing different challenges, but we have been committed to work with them, and we will get to that goal.
There it is. Oh, well, we promised it together with the provinces. Pretty sure you didn't. Pretty sure you guys put this out and you said, well, we will work with the provinces, just like the dental care program, right? Where you actually had to sign agreements with the provinces to actually have them do that. Same as this mythical pharmacare program that actually hasn't started yet. So, no, you can't do that. But this is what Michelle said. They were going to blame the provinces when this failed. And when this initially started, the problem wasn't necessarily spaces. The problem that they were allegedly trying to solve is how much it was costing families to actually do. So for her to circle right back around and say, well, there's staff that's missing, there's actual physical spaces. Well, this wasn't a problem before. It wasn't. The problem that you were trying to solve was cost. But what happened? You forced a system on the entire country, which is garbage, and then you bring in another couple million people. What's going to happen? Could that create a supply and demand issue? Yeah, pretty sure it will. Especially when you have daycares closing, which provide less spots for these kids, and more people in need of them, providing less spots for the kids. What did you think was going to happen? If only there was a way we could predict that.
Again, I don't want to give you a date because provinces and territories are all at different speeds and they all have different challenges. I think those are really appropriate questions for the ministers responsible in the provinces.
Well, I'm not trying to absolve the provinces of responsibility here, but your government in particular made this promise. You said that it would result in a certain conclusion. I'm not saying the program has been ineffective. It's been far from that, actually. It's been a very effective program.
In fact, the Auditor General found that as well.
Yes, and I would not take away from that, but execution matters as well. And it's sort of my job to hold the government to account on the promises it makes and whether they execute on them. The number of spaces the AG flagged that have been created are sitting at not even half of what was promised 3 years in. The track record thus far does not, I don't think would imbue a sense of confidence among Canadians that the rest of them will be filled out by the date that you promised. Can you be honest with Canadians tonight? Like, is there any chance of meeting the target that you set out, your government set out?
There's always a chance of meeting the target, of course. But listen, what I would say is that we rely on the provinces and territories to find the spots, create the spots, and then staff those spots. And so the money that we've committed, as you know, it's about $35 billion so far overall to this program, is a significant contribution. In fact, it's the majority of the contribution. And we have the capacity to work with provinces and territories in terms of the quantity of the investment, in terms of we have very stringent criteria and targets with provinces and territories. Just this morning, Minister Calandra was talking about the poor data that Ontario has and the improvement that he is pushing for in Ontario to be able to actually quantify what is happening in the system. So we'll be there to get to that goal, and we're going to continue to have these conversations with our counterparts.
Does there need to be more than a conversation, though? Does there need to be more accountability with the money that you are handing provinces? Like, I understand it allows the government to say, hey, this is the province's fault, but ultimately these are, many moms and dads who I know who hope to take advantage of what sounded like a great program and instead find themselves on 3-year wait lists in various provinces, not just Ontario.
That's why it was exciting to hear Minister Calandra talk today about the need for better data in Ontario so that they can really target where the weaknesses are in their own provincial system. So today he spoke about that at length, and in fact that was part of our negotiations, was really drilling down to understand what spots have been created, what the gaps are, and what they're going to do next to actually add almost 40,000 spots in the next year. So that was a big part of the agreement today, was actually spot creation. I agree with you, families need equity, and Canadians expect that if there's a program available, they want to be able to take advantage of that too, and we will push provinces and territories, and we'll make sure that we have the right inputs to get there.
I still can't get over the smugness that is on Patty Hajdu's face as she is she's like the look on her face is just disdain, smug. I don't want to be here. And it's funny that she keeps talking about data. Data. Oh, well, provinces, they've just announced that they need better data. Yeah, we need better data. We need more equity when it comes to Canadians and their families. Well, if only we knew that data was a problem. Oh wait, we did.
As a parliamentarian, there's data points that I cannot find. So, for example, how many children are currently enrolled in a $10 a day spot in total and broken down by province or territory? It is impossible for parliamentarians to find out the number of children that have access to the spot and then measure it against the needs in a region. The other concern that I have is that there is no data that's been provided on the average income of parents who have the $10 a day spot. I am concerned that these spots will be disproportionately going to higher income Canadians as opposed to lower income Canadians or Canadians that might be in the gig economy or in shift work. The other piece of data that we don't have is how many $10 a day spots are for flexible childcare outside of the hours between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m.
So what the Liberals have basically done is said, we are bringing $10 a day childcare to people across Canada. And then they're saying, well, we're actually not going to actually do the program. That's everybody else's problem. We just give money. It's your job to figure all this out. And when it goes badly, we are going to blame you, even though it was our program and our idea. This is the Liberal government in a nutshell. And nothing has changed. And this is what swing voters need to pay attention to. Nothing has changed with this government. Like, you changed the leader, but nothing's changed in how it operates. They still have these ideas, and nothing happens with them. You know, we even had Stephen Guilbeault admit that there were no ideas for these nation-changing projects during the campaign. But they made everybody think that they had this whole slate of nation-building ideas, nation-building projects, transform the country. But they had none. Their goal was, well, we're going to say this, we're going to make everybody think that we have it, and when we don't, and we called this when Mark Carney went to the premiers and had this premier meeting. And we said, oh, this is how this is going to work. He doesn't have any ideas. He's going to make it everybody else's problem to come up with the ideas of these quote-unquote nation-building projects. So this is how it works with the Liberals. They never take any accountability, and they sell everybody on smoke and mirrors, but they actually don't have any substance behind it. And then when it comes to actual implementation, they blame everybody else and say it's not our fault. We're just the idea people.
Why does it take 3 years for you to make part of negotiations with provinces, though, that they collect better data? Again, I'll go back to the Auditor General, who flagged that, you know, yes, she can identify how many spaces have and have not been created, but there is no data available for her to ascertain whether or not access is equivalent for lower income, middle income, high income. Like, there's no way to determine if the people who really needed $10 a day daycare are the ones who are benefiting from it. Again, isn't that central to execution?
Well, listen, I think we've had this challenge in a number of different spaces. I've been a minister for 10 years now and held a number of different portfolios during the pandemic. We had a really hard time getting health data out of provinces and territories in terms of who was getting sick and what hospital utilization rates were actually expressing themselves in the population. And so that data question in a federation is, I think, one of the most important. And it was very assuring today to hear Minister Calandra agree to be more diligent with his own ministry, with the Government of Ontario, to collect the data and to understand where the gaps are and where the weaknesses are in the system and what steps they're going to take to strengthen it. And in fact, he talked about the federal government being fierce in its demands for this data, and that's where we're going as a country. We have to be able to be, to your point, accountable to Canadians for the programs that we announce as a collective and that Canadians are then counting on. So that's the work. We heard the Auditor General and we're taking action.
So when will you be able to tell Canadians whether or not this program is working in the way 3 years ago you promised it would, and that the people who need more affordable childcare are actually accessing it?
What I would say is that Canadians all across the country are telling us that it is working. I mean, look, a savings in Ontario of $10,400 on average per family is nothing to laugh at. I mean, these are big
I'm not laughing
numbers.
at it, to be clear, but you're unable to say if a low-income family is benefiting that more than a high-income family.
Well,
That's a problem.
I think this program is universal, as you would know. And so the idea behind universal access is to make sure that no matter what your circumstance, that you are not going to, as a primary caregiver, most often women, miss out on the opportunity of earnings and on career trajectory. Look, this is an economic program, and I can tell you gender economists across the country celebrated when we launched this program in the way that we did. And you know why? Because productivity in Canada is lagging. And part of the productivity challenge is that women often, who are the primary caregivers, lose that essential time of career growth, which is part of the productivity challenge. And so look, we have the most women ever in the workforce, and we have women that are using those 3 to 5 years that possibly before they wouldn't have been able to participate in their chosen career to continue to grow their careers.
There's so much wrong, with what she said there. It's hard to even know where to start. But it's something that Conservatives call this stuff out almost 2 years ago, and we're still there. And I shake my head when Patty Hajdu says, oh, well, you know, I've seen this problem, not just in childcare, it's everywhere in the government. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised, but I still shake my head. You guys have had 10 years. So if you're trying to say that virtually every department that reports into the federal government has this same data problem, and you haven't done anything about it, what does that say about you? Now listen, in the private sector, when you come forward with an idea that is supposed to be transformational, it's a business initiative, you know, a new product, a new wing, a new service, that sort of thing, you have to bring forward something called a business plan. And in that business plan, you need to be coming forward with this is the budget, this is how much it's going to cost, this is how much we're going to make, and this is how we are going to measure whether or not this is working and being successful. And that can be measured in many different ways depending on the industry that you're in. If it's television, perhaps it's ratings, perhaps it's ad revenue. You know, if it's in manufacturing, it's going to be number of customers, net new number of customers, net loss number of customers, profit versus production, gross profit, net profit. There's many different ways to actually measure success. But what the Liberals do is there is no measure for success. And every time they state that there's a measure of success, like Mark Carney did for Canadians Will Judge Me by the cost of the groceries at the grocery store, they always fail in catastrophic ways to actually meet those measurables, which is most likely why they try to avoid putting those out at all. So this is the issue. And Heidi is trying to say, well, you know, 10,000, you know, savings. Well, how does that $10,000 in savings help if the family that's taking advantage of that makes over $500,000 a year? And then you turn around and say, well, you know, more women in the workforce are here than ever before. Well, the problem is Michelle Ferrer also talked about in her speech how it's actually gone down in terms of the number of women in the workforce because they can't go because of the stupid childcare program. There's less women in the workforce now than there was. So all of this is just smoke and mirrors from Patty Hajdu, and she's annoyed that she's having to talk about a failing program. But again, provinces, as predicted.
Setting the provinces up to take the blame when they were coerced into signing a flawed federal contract.